Hey Wolfpack, and welcome back. I hope you all had a great and spooky week. Today, we're doing Volume 2 of 3 Scary Cult Stories. I hope you all enjoy. What's your favorite horror movie character? Comment down below, please. I'm very interested to know. With that said, whether you're sitting around a campfire, on the night shift, or even laying in bed, let my voice soothe your nightmares. Okay, I'm posting here because I think this would be a good fit for my story. Paul told me to stay put and wait this out, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm afraid for my life. Where do I start? Jesus. This is a rabbit hole that's tedious to explain, but I'll try my best. Let's start with me. I'm 23, unmarried, so I live alone, and I have solar urticaria. For those who don't know, it's an allergy to sunlight. My skin breaks into itchy hives and leaves a blisterous rash if I scratch them. They go away after a few hours, but it still sucks that I can't leave my house too often. I spend most of my time browsing the internet, as you could probably tell, but I digress. A week ago on Saturday, I was randomly searching weird questions that came across my mind on Google, and I noticed an advertisement at the top when I had searched up what menthol is. The title of the advertisement said, "Come with us to Transcendence." Don't get me wrong, I'm an atheist. What kind of god would create the sun and make someone allergic to it? After seeing this ad, however, I can't deny my interest was piqued. I clicked on it, and immediately an X file tried to download. I clicked to cancel the download, but noticed the program was called Ascendant MNJCQ9.exe. I have no idea what that N part meant, but I assumed that Ascendant had something to do with this website. The page was sloppily created, with a mismatch of colors and plain text scattered randomly spouting off about ascending and transcending. At the top was the title, Children of His Wind. The repetition was a little amusing, I must admit. It looked like a 5th grader tried to summarize the teachings of Buddha. The main text box in the center of the page was rambling about how the human body has 9 focal points, and that all have different responsibilities of keeping us grounded, whatever that means. Now, normally, you'd have a laugh and make fun of the poorly designed web page and the oblivious nature of this group, but I noticed something. A contact tab. I'm not going to lie, I wanted to mess around with these guys. They listed a phone number, email address, and physical address. The address led me to a Taco Bell in the Pentagon, so that was a no-go. But when I tried the phone number, it went through, and this is where my trouble starts. After ringing several times, an automated female voice picked up and said, "Hello, you wish to ascend?" I responded yes. She continued, "Do you wish to find your 9 focal points?" I answered yes. Anything to get me on the phone with these nutjobs faster. My stomach had butterflies. I was a little excited because crank calls were a guilty pleasure of mine when I was younger, and it was fun to do something like this again. The final question sent a chill down my spine. "Jonathan, why do you call us with false intentions?" My heart skipped a beat. The automated voice message for a cult knew my name and knew I was lying somehow. The butterflies in my stomach continued flapping faster. My throat was dead dry, and a lump formed in the back of it. I asked with the most confident voice I could muster, "How the hell do you know my name?" The line went dead. To say I was spooked would be an understatement, but I figured they probably just saw my caller ID and guessed I was lying. Maybe my excitement showed in my voice or something. I don't know. What happened afterwards, though, I fear for my safety. 2 days after the call, I had a knock on my door, which is a little weird because I normally don't have visitors, and if I did, they would normally text or call me beforehand. I walked through my house to the door and cracked it, not wanting any sunlight to get on my skin. Nobody was there, but there was a package. It was a plain cardboard box about the size of an Xbox. I took it inside and cut open the clear packing tape, and inside was a piece of paper with the same title from the webpage. It said 2 words, "We're coming." Under the paper was a small dagger, caked in dried brown blood. This was 5 days ago, and I haven't had any more activity or packages, but I'm scared. I hear small knocks at night and slight shuffles, but I have no clue if it's my mind playing tricks on me or not, because every time I go to check, my house is completely empty. My friend Paul suggested sharing my story for thoughts on what to do, but it seems as if they're going to leave me alone. Oh, and by the way, I did find my 9 focal points, and learn how to ascend. Children of his wind really know how to convert non-believers. I didn't grow up like most people, because my late teens through mid-20s were spent as a devoted member of a cult. It's not quite what you think, though. I know, that's probably exactly what you'd expect an ex-cultist to say, right? Truth is, it is only now, some 30-odd years since I had last associated with them, that I can even recognize the group for what it was. Cults don't always involve a higher power. Sometimes, it's just a group of people whose noble intentions are used to justify the most horrendous actions. There was no God in our cult, no stringent religious doctrine, child abuse, mass deaths, or anyone else would normally equivalent to cult-like behavior. There was, however, a strong emphasis on adhering to the prevailing narrative. Dissidence was not tolerated, and heresy was punished with excommunication, which to me was worse than death. I've always loved nature, animals, and being out in the wilderness in general. I've dedicated the majority of my life to conservation efforts and preventing disruption of wildlife ecosystems in whatever way I can. Some would probably call me a hippie, and I suppose I am, but we call ourselves Earth Protectors. You're probably rolling your eyes at how pompous that sounds, and I wouldn't blame you. It was pretty cheesy, but I always kinda liked that. It was the title I adopted for over a decade. When I was a part of the Earth Defense and Environmentalist Network, Eden, as it was known, was initially a localized group of like-minded individuals which began at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was a freshman there, when I first met a guy by the name of Tiago Lemery. Lemery was much like me, enthusiast of nature, and passionate about the conservation of it. He and I hit it off right away, and quickly became close with our group of friends. Lemery was a born leader, a strong spokesman, and visionary perhaps too advanced for his contemporaries. He seemed to gain a following wherever he went, and used his profuse charisma to enthrall others into his mission. We dedicated most of our weekends back to the environmentalist efforts, whether it was picking up trash from a local beach, helping to transplant trees in logging areas, or even volunteering at animal shelters. Anything and everything we could do to help nature survive and thrive, we happily did. It was not long after that Eden became the unofficial title of our group. There were 9 of us in the beginning. As time went on, more members joined, and things began to grow strained. Several members of the group wanted to legitimize the group and make it an official organization, but Lemery, myself, and several others disagreed. It was our belief that if we became a legitimate business entity, it would take away our initial goals. Lemery argued that it would prioritize profit rather than conservation, and many of us agreed. The group split soon after that, unable to mediate our differences. We lost over 2/3 of our members, who went on to found a rather high-profile organization that still exists to this day. It was then I first began to notice a change in Lemery. He was always an upbeat guy, always friendly and welcoming. But after the split, he became more bitter. It seemed like with every cleanup, he became more resentful and spiteful. He would scowl at people frolicking on the beach as we used our pikes to impale candy wrappers and soda cans. It's really disgusting what people do to this planet, you know? He stared at me with narrowed eyes as he took a swig from his Jose Cuervo bottle. It had been a long hot day of shoveling trash from the canals of Rio de Janeiro. He passed me the bottle, and I took a swig as he continued. Like with all the beautiful things on this earth, people are content to just screw it up. Like no one even cares about it. I lowered the bottle as the rush of tequila descended my throat. I do. I handed the bottle back, wincing. Lemery scoffed. Yeah, we can only do so much, though. He stared away from the campfire and into the dark of the night. That's what happens when the ecosystem is unbalanced. Another voice broke our conversation, and Larissa strolled up to the fire. She was another long-standing member of our group. She took a seat across from us, and Lemery handed her the bottle. How many people on this planet? 6, 7 billion? She took a swig, and her eyes glinted at Lemery. He glared back. Too many. I went to bed not long after that, but that should have been my first warning sign. Most of our conversations took on a much more sinister undertone after that, as if a great storm was approaching, but I was young and blind to the danger on the horizon. A man by the name of Ruben Cavalli joined the group soon after that. He wasn't like the others, though. The others were passionate, easygoing, but Cavalli, he was somber and rarely spoke. His eyes seemed dark and brooding at all times, like whatever lingered on his mind was something he dared not to say. He and I rarely ever talked, but both Larissa and Lemery seemed to take a unique liking to him. I'd always see them chatting and laughing amongst themselves. I don't think he trusted me much, because whenever I came around, he would suddenly become stoic again. Lemery seemed to get worse as well, growing more hateful and more contemptuous. He'd lash out for the smallest of things, and more than once he made another member of the team cry for the tiniest of errors. I didn't understand his sudden change, but one night, our conversations made things much clearer for me. Did you know, if bees went extinct, the entire world would basically die? He suddenly asked the question after he and I had been conversing for a while. Keep in mind, this was back in the 80s, and the whole bee phenomenon was not yet widely known. No, I didn't know that. Lemery nodded and stared at the ground. Yep, they wouldn't be there to pollinate flowers anymore. Crops would suffer as a result and struggle to reproduce. The animals that eat plants would be hard-pressed to find them, so on and so forth. He paused and gave a sly chuckle. Amazing how delicate the balance is, you know? One single organism disappears, and we're all pretty much screwed. I nodded back at him. Butterfly effect, I guess. Lemery nodded. Something like that. But, you know, if humans disappeared, other species on the planet would flourish. I laughed and nodded back. I wouldn't get your hopes up for that. That's what happens when you're so above the food chain that there is almost zero risk. Population grows out of control. I mean, be honest for a second with me. How many people on this planet do you think are absolutely necessary? I don't have a good response for him at the time. But now, I've got 100. I wish I would have argued. It would have changed his mind. But it may have alleviated some of the guilt. I didn't say anything because I, like Lemery, had begun to hate humanity, and so I was content to let the cold chill slither down my spine unheeded. A couple weeks after that conversation, something happened. 2 people were caught at an oil refinery about an hour north of us with a van full of explosives. They had over a dozen homemade pipe bombs in their possession, and that led police to assume they were attempting to detonate them and sabotage the pipeline. Those 2 people were also members of Eden. I never knew of their plans to do anything like that, and that discovery really caught me off guard. Lemery didn't seem to be fazed by it, though. The cops investigated us, but we denied any and all involvement. I still don't know whether or not that was true. Things got a lot more divided after that. The media spun it as some sort of eco-terrorist operation. It was false for the most part, but it was enough to scare away nearly half of our members at the time. That should have been the moment I called it quits as well, but it wasn't. I didn't have a whole lot going for me at the time. No real family left, and no other ambition to do anything else. I also wholeheartedly believed in Tiago Lemery and the message he spoke. So I stayed, convinced by my peers and determined to continue our work. That eventually really galvanized Lemery, and he began to speak in terms of frantic measures we needed to undertake. He cursed those who had left as treasonous cowards, and assured us that we were on the path to something incredible. His rhetoric became far more radical from that point on. You could almost see the flames in his eyes and taste the venom from his words as he angrily lectured about the disgusting human species. He spoke of a bizarre wish that he held, of his desire to see an apex predator to keep human populations in check. He said he wished he could revive dinosaurs or other ancient beasts to help smash human populations, or call the herd, as he called it. His cracks began to show, but I, of course, downplayed the sentiment, because it wasn't like his fantasy was actually going to happen. I was young, I was naive and foolish, and I bought into his message, hook, line, and sinker. I began to truly hate human beings outside of our group, and became convinced that the world was doomed if we did not do something to save it. Back then, I would have done anything to save the world I loved. At the time, Lemery owned about a dozen acres out in the woods just outside of Barritos. It was there that most of us made our home, a small compound away from the cities, in which we would all work together to survive off the land. I realize now how cult-like that sounds, but at the time, it was just a community of like-minded people who cared about nature. Lemery had quickly begun to grow more radical though. You've seen the lies they've told about us. You've seen how the rich tycoons who plunder natural resources point the finger at us and dare to accuse us of being the problem, as if protecting the planet is a bad thing. But we all know what the real problem is, don't we? The members of his audience nodded back, and in the corner, I saw Ruben Cavalli leering with a wide, eager grin. Humanity. They screw, pillage, and destroy this beautiful world. Slaughter animals in death camps to feed their insatiable appetites. Poison oceans with filth, and eviscerate the forest to accommodate more of their parasites. They are the real problem. They sit atop the food chain, with nothing to keep their numbers at bay. He paused, and let his words roll amongst the crowd for a moment. Another member then stood and posed a question. What can we even do? People just don't care about this enough to change. Lemery paused at his podium, and a meager smile crossed his lips. We must show them the danger for not caring. Lemery then locked eyes with Cavalli, and seemed to share a silent secret together. The congregation questioned him on how he planned to do it, but Lemery didn't say much more. For months, we were subjected to the barrage of misanthropic propaganda, while Lemery, Cavalli, and others began to sow the seeds of malcontent. I remember the night it happened. We had prepared for months, gone over the details of the procedure ad nauseum, and recited the details again and again. I thought it was only a ceremony of some kind, or a rite of initiation. I had no idea what I was in for. Our school stood there, garbed in black robes, with our arms spread out in a cross formation. We had spent hours applying the intricate patterns on our faces with red and white paints. I felt like a fool standing there, as the pyre of flame bellowed in front of me, but I didn't dare question it. I didn't even think that what I was about to be a part of was anything out of the ordinary. Lemery had spent years studying the customs and teachings of local tribes and men of the wild. Turns out, they knew a few things we didn't. Specifically, things I never thought were possible. The fire burned bright and hot, at least 10 feet high, as our group awaited the appearance of Lemery. Before long, he finally showed, accompanied by Larissa. Both of them wore the black robes, with opulent necklaces embroidered with scarlet jewels. Their eyes were wide, yet unfocused as if in a trance. Then, he came after, the man who for years had been a constant anxiety for me, Reuben Cavalli, a renowned practitioner of the blood arts. Heretical things that had been long outlawed by local authorities, but there were those who continued to dabble. He held a scroll of parchment in his hands, and upon it, something eerie was depicted. I hadn't the faintest idea what to expect, but I held my position all the same. As the fire grew taller and hotter, as Cavalli began to chant, and even as the shadows began to twist around me, Cavalli laid the mural on the ground, and even now, I find it hard to describe. An ancient thing, instructions from those whose origin had long faded into oblivion. Upon it, there was a beast of otherworldly appearance, razor-sharp claws on its hands and legs, cenoid scales upon its back and chest, covered by a blanket of black feathers, a whip-like tail that ended in a vespid stinger, and a long, slender neck, topped by a mammalian snout with jagged and mismatched teeth. An abomination by all accounts, and a thing that should have not been. Cavalli continued to chant, as the maddening sounds of the chorus serenaded the forest. Somewhere far off, I heard the agonized cries of animals, as if they were deeply opposed of what was transpiring. The winds bolstered, blowing the flames about the vicinity and sending showers of sparks in all directions. Then, I heard something deep in the woods, which, to this day, makes me shudder. Laughter from something that enjoyed the dance of heathens. Tiago Lemery and his lover Larissa both entered their respective coffins. Lemery looked up at me one last time. I saw no shred of hesitance in his eyes, only hatred. Other members of our group placed the lids on the coffins and rolled them into position atop the open pits. The other members then lugged in the two offerings, two men, rich business types from the city. They were bound and gagged, and their faces with rife and terror. They pleaded in indiscernible voices for mercy, but none listened. Lemery had diligently convinced his congregation that they were the enemy, and no mercy was to be shown to them. They were held into position, and the locks upon the sides of the coffins were secured. Cavalli then lay his hands upon each of them, and began to speak his blasphemous words. I've never heard a language like that before, and I hope to never hear it again. The carved runes which decorated the coffins seemed to almost glow in the light of the fire. Cavalli's words grew louder, and his eyes rolled back into his head, leaving only white slits. The flames seemed altogether unbearable, and lashed back and forth, up and down, like the sea in the midst of a cyclone. Several of the others suddenly fell to their knees, while others began to writhe about as if intoxicated by ecstasy and agony. They cried, crackled, moaned, and screamed hysterically. I then felt it, a crippling madness nibbling at the back of my mind. I tried to resist it, but the feeling was altogether overwhelming. Visions struck me like bolts of lightning, worlds burning, oceans boiling, an innumerable number of people suffering in ways too grotesque to even mention. I knew then it was wrong. My eyes began to flutter, and I fell to my knees like the rest had. With all my strength, I managed to look towards Cavalli. Just as his acolytes slit the two men, they gurgled and flailed before being tossed into the coffins. Blood poured from their gullets, staining and saturating the lids in soil. The coffins began to shake about, and I heard terrible screams coming from inside. Something then changed within me. As I watched the breath drain from the two men, a horrifying realization struck me, and I realized what I was. No, stop this! Cavalli, this isn't right! I begged, and I tried to force myself towards them, but all the strength had fled my body. I could do nothing but watch and cry, as my two friends were lowered down into the pits, coffins still adorned by the fresh corpses of the businessmen. The last thing I remember, before fading out entirely, was Tiago Lemery screaming from within his coffin, the last words I ever heard him speak. "More food." My eyes opened, and daylight greeted me. I sprung up to a seated position and coughed from the oppressive smoke. The once raging pyre had smoldered into ashes and cinders. Around me lay the other members of Eden, still fast asleep. I then realized the coffins were gone. At their position, I realized the pits had been filled with dirt. I scrambled towards the mounds and frantically began to dig with my hands. I had to get them out. "They're not ready yet," a familiar voice called out. I looked up to see the chatoyant eyes of Reuben Cavalli staring back at me. "What the hell did you do?" Cavalli dusted the ashes from his robe and looked to me with a devious smirk. "I made them what they needed to be." Others in the congregation began to stir around us then. No, we need to get them out. They'll die," I screamed as I resumed digging. "And we will, but not until the time is right." He and I stared, a mutual disdain simmering between us. I thought they were both dead, and I thought I had witnessed their murders and been unable to do a thing about it. I don't know how, or if I even could rationalize what I saw that night. All I know for certain is that when I put my ear to the mound of dirt, I can hear a rhythmic pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. For 3 entire days, I questioned my own sanity, and everything that had happened that night. I wanted to go to the police, but I knew they would never believe what had happened. I didn't have anywhere else to go, and more than anything, I feared what the repercussions were if I betrayed Eden. The moment was a true crossroads for me, and for those entire 3 days, I couldn't eat or sleep a wink. It was like I knew what I had to do, but I hated the idea of doing it. Finally, as dawn broke on the 3rd day, I left it all behind. I just couldn't get over the guilt, and didn't want my life to solely consist of hatred and vengeance. I went straight to the police and told them everything that I have here today. They were skeptical to say the least, but agreed to accompany me back to the compound. I returned to my former home with the police the next day. The primitive wooden homes came into view as we crested over the hill, but immediately something seemed different. The cops sprung into action and swarmed into our small village. They screamed orders for everyone to exit with their hands up, but no one answered the call. I could see the confusion begin to swirl in their eyes, and after a couple minutes of searching, the police chief approached me. "Where is everyone?" I didn't know how to answer. Everyone was gone, but something found in one of the houses seemed to offer a clue. There was a large hole torn in the side of the small building, and within it, a spackling of blood coated the floor. I began to inspect it with them, until another officer called for our attention. He was up on a hill, towards the area that our strange ceremony had taken place. His face had gone pale, and his rifle quivered in his hands as we approached. Once we crested the hill, I saw what it was that had terrified him. There was a girl there. Well, what was left of her anyway. She was missing her right arm, and had a large hole in her sternum. Her name was Rosa, and she couldn't have been more than 20 years old. My knees grew weak beneath me, and I turned to vomit as I saw her. The cops, too, seemed incredibly disturbed by the sight. Flies buzzed around the vicinity, and the hot sun had begun to rapidly degrade her corpse, leaving a horrendous smell. I don't think anyone expected to come across something like that, but the worst was yet to come. "Show me the spot." The police chief turned to me with sharp and hateful eyes. I hauled myself up from the dirt, and although I didn't want to, I had to know. We continued along the trail for some time, and soon a powerful stench began wafting through the air. The smell of rot was so harsh it made my eyes water, and with every step, I grew more nervous of what we were about to see. Finally, we entered the small clearing, and I felt my heart completely deflate. There were more bodies there, at least half a dozen by the looks of it, and they were so mangled it was difficult to be sure. Some were headless, others were missing limbs and large chunks of abdomen, and some even looked like something had taken a bite out of them. The pyre stood as a blackened pit upon the ground, and around it, the vegetation seemed to have retreated from the spot. It was as if the plants feared that place now. In the center of it all, though, was the most disturbing sight of all. The 2 coffins sat upon the ground, wide open, mangled, and empty. The 2 men killed as sacrifice were nowhere to be seen, but beside the coffins, I recognized a familiar face, Reuben Cavalli, dead like the rest with the enormous hole where his chest had once been. Others in the police brigade began to gag, wrench, and a few dropped to their knees to say Hail Marys. The police chief took a look around, and even he seemed entirely appalled. "What in God's name did you do?" Once again, I didn't have an answer, but as I pondered, my eye fell upon something sitting in the dirt, Cavalli's mural. That parchment that displayed that wretched creature. Both of us stood staring at it for a moment, before something split the very air of the evening. A scream, a sound so wretched and painful it seemed to rip the bark from the trees. My blood turned to ice in my veins, as the inhumane cry blared out like thunder. The cops drew their rifles and formed a defensive blockade around the camp. Their hands were shaking, and I could see their pupils double in size. We must have stood there for at least 10 minutes, cowering and awaiting whatever terrible fiend had made that noise. It had to have been dumb luck, or perhaps their appetites had already been satiated, because whatever made that dreadful sound never showed its face. We finally left some time after, but the damage could never be undone. My memory after that point is a bit clouded. There were cops, investigations, trials, and oh so many questions. They must have interrogated me at least a dozen times, and in my desperate stupidity, I told them everything I've written here today. 7 of our members lost their lives that day, and 5 others had never been found. Tiago Lemery and Larissa Avali are 2 of them. Some members of Eden had escaped, and a few of them were found and brought in for questioning. Their stories ended up being remarkably similar to mine. They spoke of the 2 monsters that had arisen from the coffins, and slaughtered everyone they could get their hands on. Another girl named Mary Rose had a massive wound across her chest. It looked an awful lot like claw marks to me, but the police were unwilling to even entertain the fables. After a lengthy negotiation process, and unwillingness for the police to substantiate my story, we were all tried for manslaughter. After my testimony, I was deemed to be mentally unfit, and was ordained to be in an asylum. I spent the next 17 years there, and every day I questioned everything I had seen and heard. I probably never would have been allowed to walk free if I didn't abandon trying to tell people the truth. No one believed it, and I don't blame them. I am an old man now, and I wish for nothing more than to erase these memories. But this is my life, and these are the things I have done. I don't expect forgiveness for what I took part in. I just hope others can learn from my mistakes. Don't assume that your benevolence will yield positive outcomes, because there are those who will use it against you. Be smarter than I was, and beware those who seek to use your kindness against you. I still spend most of my days cleaning up litter. It's the only thing that really brings me peace. As you may have imagined, they never found any trace of those things. Some nights, when I'm alone back at my house, I can swear I hear that wretched howl once more. Every once in a while, we get a story here in Brazil of something being horrifically mutilated by an animal attack. It's not animals though, it's monsters. They're not Lemery and Larissa anymore. They are the apex predators they always wished for, hunting down humans just as they had always wanted all along. I doubt they'll ever be found, but for the sake of all of us, I just hope they can't breed. Sometimes you make choices in life that dictates your every move until the day you die. I made one of those choices. Sometimes these decisions can ruin your life, make you not even want to finish it, if you know what I mean. Mine was that kind. I used to be an escort, not to be confused with a prostitute, although, at the bare bones of it, they are the exact same thing. Women hired for their bodies. Prostitutes usually just for sex, but escorts, they are performers, actresses. I've been someone's wedding date, multiple men's girlfriend at charity events, and even someone's sister used to trick their wife into a sick three-way. I guess it was safe, since he wouldn't leave her for his own sister. That being said, at the end of the day, they all want the same thing, and they pay me a lot of money for it. Unlike prostitutes that pick up random johns from street corners, I had a little black book of clientele, 12 to be exact, when I got out of the business. That may sound like a lot, but most of these clients only needed me for a week or two out of the year. A week at the Aspen Cabin, Memorial weekends on a yacht. I had only 5 that I saw weekly. A girl needs her off days. By now, you're probably judging me pretty hard, and that's fine. The way you feel about me now won't compare to how you'll see me after I tell you about my last client. He was my bad decision, the choice that now rules over my life. My number one client of 3 years just had died in a car accident. He was my cash cow, a business executive that was too busy for a wife, but wanted company once or maybe twice a week. I charged $800 an hour, and he would hire me for the whole night. So you can imagine me how much money I lost after his death. He needed to be replaced, and fast. There are a lot of ways to get new clients. I started out at casinos, watching for big winners, but in 2020, the best way by far is the dark web. I'm going to assume you don't know a lot about the dark web, as most people don't. There are a lot of misconceptions, but honestly, it's just a whole bunch of people offering services that the government and society have deemed immoral and illegal. Prudes. Of course, you can run across someone with malicious intent, just like you could at a restaurant, Walmart, or even church. You just have to be safe and take all the necessary precautions. I obviously couldn't be too picky at this time. I definitely wasn't going to find a client as wealthy as Donnie right off the bat, so I was willing to take any job at that point. I posted my services in the usual escort forum I had worked with before, and after about a month, and 6 degrading jobs that I was forced to drop my rate for later, I received an email requesting services, but the details would be discussed in person. Even on the dark web, this is a strange request, but not unheard of. One of my first clients from the web had the same request, just so he could prove to me he wasn't a weirdo before asking if he could bite my toenails. He was actually a very sweet guy. Later, he had lost his job, so I just let him do it for free since it saved me a trip to the salon. Maybe this new guy just has some weird fetish. My response was, I agree to the meeting, but am not accepting the job until the details are agreed upon. He sent back the address for the coffee shop downtown, and the time, 9 a.m. the next day. I instantly walked up to the counter to order my iced mocha. I don't talk business before coffee. I take a sip as I scan the room for someone that looks like they are here to meet an escort. Maybe that guy in all black sitting awkwardly in the corner with no cup, I thought. I sit across from the man that looks as though he has never been in a coffee shop before. You should have at least ordered a coffee. You wouldn't look so awkward, I teased. I don't drink coffee, he replied with a flat voice. Well then, why didn't we meet somewhere you could be more comfortable? I asked. It's about your comfort, he answered. Something about him told me he was a very sheltered man. We get a lot of those types, so you can tell most of the time. What bothered me the most was the lack of emotion in his eyes. They were just dead. That's a sweet gesture, but I don't need to be buttered up. We're here for business. What is your business? I demanded. He sat back in his chair, somewhat amused. Well, obviously you offer certain services, and I mean to hire you for my boss. Your boss? I asked. Yes, he said, pulling an envelope out of his pocket. He is throwing a gala of sorts this weekend, and would like women of your caliber to attend. It's to celebrate and raise money for an event that only comes around every 5,000 years. We have already hired other female entertainment as well. He placed the envelope on the table. Okay, so what's the catch? A mere gala doesn't require this much secrecy, I stated. Yes, The catch. Well, really there is no catch. The boss will want some company after, and maybe even during the gala, which is where you come in. He is paying $10,000 up front, and the other 10 after the gala. The only thing is, he has some deformities. I sat and thought about the word deformities for a moment. If I were shallow, I wouldn't have made it this far in my career. Most of my clients lean more towards what you would call unattractive anyways. Plus, $20,000 is a lot of money. Well, honestly, it doesn't matter what he looks like, as long as you're not hiring me to screw an idiot or anything, I said. The man smiled for the first time since the conversation started. No, nothing like that. He is a completely competent and consenting adult, he responded. He just looks a little different. After weighing my pros and cons, I agreed to the terms, and the meeting ended with him writing down an address and casually walking out, leaving behind the envelope with $10,000 cash. I was more than happy. The day of the gala came, and I put on my best gown and pearls, wondering what cause it was for. The last one I attended was to raise money to clean up the oil spill in the Gulf. Whatever it was, I did like helping, even if I was only there to screw some deformed guy. When I arrived, I was instantly amazed at how big the house was. It was really more of a castle, to be honest. It towered over me like a brick skyscraper from the 1600s. I was greeted at the door by a man in a black cloak, which I thought was kind of weird, but ignored. "The Lord of the house welcomes you," the man said in the strangest accent I'd ever heard. Lord? I thought. Maybe I should try to put this guy in my book. He would be the only one I'd need with money like this. As I finished my thought, I heard a scream echo from within the house. It was at this point I became nervous. Before I knew it, I was guided into the house by a man, not knowing that my life was about to change forever. Upon entering, I was immediately caught off guard. Everyone wearing black cloaks except the rest of the entertainment, which was a mix of upper-class debutants and freshly plucked hookers. It finally clicks. This is a cult. I look around and see, well, normal people drinking and having a good time, and in the back of the room, a 20 feet high red metal door. I strained my eyes to try to identify the markings. "I'm glad you can make it," the man from the meeting said as he took my arm, guiding me through the crowd. "Yes, of course. We do have a business agreement after all." I forced out with a shudder in my voice. "A woman of her word. I love it. You don't find many of those these days," he said with more confidence than he should have. What the hell? I thought. Before I could respond, he started again. "The boss has already had a long night, and has retired to his study. He requested your company upon arrival." Before I knew it, I was standing in front of the big red metal door. The sound of it opening paralyzed me as I was pushed through the threshold into the dim room. The door slammed behind me, echoing through the room and my soul. "I'm so scared," I thought. "I want to leave, but I can't move." "Hello," the voice radiated through my body. It added so much more to my fear. His silhouette rose from the chair in the corner, confusing me because of its shape. "I've been expecting you," the voice said as if it were spoken by multiple people at the same time. "Expecting me? Or anyone?" I squeaked. "Everyone," he replied quickly. The man emerges from the shadows, revealing he's not simply deformed, nor is he simply a man. Its scaly gray hands reached out, grabbing both of my arms. I couldn't move. The creature pulled me in close, running his snout down my neck. His warm breath melted away my chills. "I apologize for the heat. I'm warm-blooded," he explained. I couldn't take my focus off his horns. They were beautiful. Why did I feel this way? I questioned. I could feel myself dripping. I prayed for the beast to mount me like the animal it was. Mercifully, it granted my wish. Who knew heaven was so close to hell? I came to my senses in the foyer with a group of other women who also appeared to be waking up from a sex coma. Somehow, I was already holding my jacket and purse, so I walked straight towards the exit. As I walked past the man from the meeting, he said, "See you next week." I pulled into my driveway before realizing I had driven the hour and a half in complete silence. I didn't remember driving home. I didn't remember going to sleep. I do remember waking up the next morning and downing 2 Plan B pills with a shot of Jack. After finishing the bottle, I went back to sleep. I woke up to the sounds of growling. Was that my stomach? I didn't feel hungry. I felt bloated and sick, and my head was killing me. I took a Lortab, ate, and went back to sleep again. I slept from Friday to Wednesday, and woke up with extreme pain. I thought maybe it was bathroom pains, but I couldn't go. The hot tube was the only thing that helped. I couldn't get the water hot enough. After the pain had dulled down to about a 3 out of 10, I fell asleep. I woke up in terror after noticing how extended my belly was. I looked 9 months pregnant. I felt a surge of pain every time a bulge moved across my stomach. As I screamed in pain, 4 cloaked men surrounded the hot tub. I passed out as they were lifting me out of the bloody water. "You need to push or he'll claw his way out," I heard a faint voice yell. I woke up with my legs spread as I lay on my kitchen table. "Push!" a voice said. I felt all of the pain release from my body into the arms of this cloaked man. After a moment, I heard the snarls from the tiny creature. "We're done here," one of the cloaked figures said. "Go to the hospital and have to explain, or stay here, maybe survive. Your choice. No one's going to believe the truth." I laid there as they left the room. As he turned the corner, I got a glimpse of the baby. He really was a monster. I didn't want to get up. I didn't care if I lived. I closed my eyes and went to sleep. I woke up on my kitchen table, sore, but able to walk. I took a shower, ate some Fruity Pebbles, and pretty much ignored the fact that I was probably internally bleeding due to giving birth to the Antichrist. It was when I remembered I needed to drain the bloody hot tub that I found this little guy. Twins, apparently. This one must have been born before the goon squad showed up. The poor thing couldn't climb his way out. He's actually kind of cute when you get used to him. His teeth are sharp, but they can't pierce rubber gloves. He's easily maintained and just eats raw beef or pork. He's growing fast, and I worry about that. How many more of him are there? What's going to happen when they're grown? And what should I do with it? Thanks for listening, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your own story, the links for my email and subreddit will be down below. I've also created a Discord, so if you want to join that, the link will be in the description down below as well. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And with that said, have beautiful nightmares, and I will see you next time.